How are you,
Good
Manuel?
morning. I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. You have perfect timing. I was just saying we were waiting for you to join us.
She's also
Glad to have you. This is Manuela. She's the community outreach person for First Step, a response to domestic violence. I actually am with the Rotary Club of Rockingham County, and for years we've done a car raffle that helps support their important work in the community. So we're really excited to have her with us today. Just a reminder, if you would, to mute your mics while she is speaking, and then we'll give some time toward the end for some questions and answers. So Manuela, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary. I am so excited to join you all this morning virtually as we are unable to meet in person. So thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak with you all today. And I am here to talk about First Step. We are a nonprofit organization in Harrisonburg, and we serve Harrisonburg City and Rockingham County. And for those of us that aren't familiar with First Step, we do provide all of our services completely free of charge, and they are confidential. And some of the services that we provide include legal advocacy. So we have a legal advocate that accompanies survivors to court if that's something that they're interested in doing, and so helps them with that court process. We don't have any licensed attorneys on staff. So we do work with local attorneys, specifically Blue Ridge Legal Services, for any type of legal needs that our survivors might have. We also have a housing advocate, and she works with all of our clients to find safe and affordable housing in Harrisonburg, which tends to be really difficult, especially if a survivor has not had housing before, or if they have had housing in the past, but due to the abuse that they endured, maybe the abuser used their credit and social security number and things like that, and ruined their credit score. And so our housing advocate works very closely with different landlords and organizations in the area to make sure that survivors that want to stay in Harrisonburg and Rockingham County have the tools necessary and are able to find that safe and affordable housing in our area. We have a child and youth advocate, and the child and youth advocate works with our guardians or parents that come into First Step with children to make sure that the children don't fall through the cracks when it comes to providing domestic violence services. It's really easy for folks to focus on adults and the services that they need. And so we want to be mindful that the kids also need services, whether it's therapy services, help with transportation to school. Now that the kids are virtual learning, helping with that, especially if the parents don't speak English or aren't familiar with the different technology that the kids need to be using. And then our bilingual advocate ensures that all of our folks that come in that don't speak English or that are limited English proficiency also receive the services necessary. We do have a 24/7 interpretation line that ensures anybody that is at First Step receives the services necessary regardless of language, since our bilingual advocate is only bilingual in Spanish and English. And so she makes sure that everybody receives the services, and all staff are trained to use the interpretation line, but she's kind of our go-to person for different types of advocacy. And we have now had our 1-year anniversary with this position. It's the domestic violence counselor. And honestly, that's one of my favorite positions because our domestic violence counselor provides free counseling for survivors that come into First Step. They don't have to stay at First Step to be eligible for any of the services that I mentioned. But the counseling service is really important because there are times where the therapists or counselors in our area don't have accessible or affordable rates. And those therapists or counseling services that do have sliding scale fees or accept different types of insurance that our clients have a really long waiting list. And so to us, it was really important to add that crucial service so that survivors will receive specific domestic violence counseling, because that's a really specific trauma, and we want to make sure that survivors are able to heal through that in a manner that's safe for them. And so if they're already familiar with First Step, that's something that will be beneficial to them in the long run. And our Director of Client Services, she oversees all of our advocacy services and also leads our empowerment group that meets weekly on Monday evenings. And that's just a support group that is open to anybody in Harrisonburg-Rockingham. And that could be somebody that is going through an abusive situation, somebody that has somebody that they love that is currently in an abusive situation, or just want to know more about domestic violence and how they can help their greater community. Just learn more about this issue that unfortunately affects us here in our area. And so aside from those advocacy services, we also provide shelter. I think that's one of our most popular services, kind of what we're known for in the area. And then our crisis hotline, it's the one phone number that First Step has. It's answered anytime that anybody calls. And so we are staffed 24/7, so 7 days a week, nights, weekends, and holidays. We are staffed by our shelter managers, and they're the ones that keep us going those times where the advocate staff or day staff is not there. And so, like I mentioned, all of our services are completely free. They're confidential. They are provided to anybody that walks through the doors of First Step, regardless of sex, gender, sexuality, race, age, anything that they, any concern or anything that they might have. We hope that we're able to address it. And if not, then we will present resources to them that might be able to help them. And so we make sure that everybody that calls First Step or comes to First Step receives the help necessary, even if it's not domestic violence related. And in those cases, we refer out to different resources. And then we do have opportunities for folks to be engaged with First Step, whether they want to do donation drives. As Mary said, she's involved with the Rotary Club that does the car raffle for us every year. And we are able to partner with different organizations and businesses in our area that want to support First Step and survivors. We've been around for 40 years. This year was our 40th birthday. And so we're really excited that we've been able to grow so much in the past 40 years, and hope that we'll continue to grow in the next 40 years and just providing these services to folks. And so we're really excited to be able to celebrate this year the different services that we've been able to provide, especially in the past 10 years, just how much we've grown as an agency and how much people are interested in learning about First Step and survivors. And so I wanted to give everyone a brief overview of what First Step does and the services that we provide. And when I do presentations like this, I like to, for the most part, have folks think about the questions that they want to ask. I want us to have a more in-depth understanding of what domestic violence is. And so in a few minutes, I'm going to go through the different types of domestic violence and how that affects survivors, specifically in our area, since the numbers tend to be different when we look at national domestic violence statistics, statewide, and then local. And so as I'm talking about domestic violence, sometimes these subjects can be triggering. So if anybody needs to leave the chat or has or would like to mute if at any time I talk about something that brings back memories, or knows, or somebody that is going through this, that's completely okay. We want to be able to have a conversation about this and make sure that everybody that's having the conversation is safe. And so I will now go into the different types of domestic violence and why it's so important that First Step is a part of our Harrisonburg-Rockingham area. And so when we talk about domestic violence, sometimes we think that it's only physical abuse because that's the type of abuse that we see most often. It's the most obvious. Usually when it comes to domestic violence, that's the last stage in an abusive relationship. Prior to that, there exists financial abuse. 99% of people that find themselves in an abusive relationship have suffered from some type of financial abuse. And so that's when somebody doesn't let you work or force you to work and then take your wages, or force you not to work and then does not give you the money or the tools necessary to address your basic needs, whether that's food, water, shelter, those types of things. We have psychological abuse, and that entails, mental abuse that basically targets a person's self-esteem. So insults, verbal abuse, those types of things to lower the person's self-esteem and basically make them emotionally dependent on their abuser. And then we have the verbal abuse, and that's when someone tends to either raise their voice or is just really insulting the entirety of the relationship or whenever they're together. Sexual assault is also goes into intimate partner violence and domestic violence. And although First Step doesn't specialize in sexual assault, whenever we do have somebody that comes into the agency and has suffered that type of abuse, we refer to the Collins Center. And the Collins Center, they specialize in sexual assault cases and sexual assault advocacy. So we work closely with them on those types of things. And then stalking is also a type of domestic violence, and it is really prevalent amongst younger people, specifically like college-aged kids and high school kids who are very dependent on technology. And so it's really easy for stalking to happen when there's a lot of technology involved, because sometimes people aren't safe when it comes to their technology. So those are the types of abuse. And First Step is actually the only agency in Harrisonburg City and Rockingham County that is qualified to provide specific domestic violence services. So without First Step, survivors wouldn't really have a place to go that would be able to help them with specific domestic violence things. And so although there's a lot of overlap in our clients and the agencies that we work with, it's extremely important to have an entity that focuses specifically on domestic violence because it is a specific type of trauma, as I mentioned in the past, that is really difficult because it's often stigmatized and continues to be stigmatized in our area. And so I would like to open the floor to anybody that has questions about what we've talked about so far, or just has any comments or concerns about domestic violence or the services that First Step provides.
Thank you, Manuela. If you'd like to speak, if you would just raise your hand either virtually or visually so I can see it. I actually have a question. I know that sometimes if there's someone in an abusive situation that has pets, that they're reticent to leave because if they leave the pet behind, that not good things are going to happen to the pet. Are you working with anyone or any group to help facilitate that part of abuse services as well?
Yes, so that's an excellent question. So we partnered with Anna Sarah, a local fostering and pet adoption agency that also provides veterinary services. We have partnered with them. I think we're on our 3rd year of our partnership with them. And whenever a survivor comes to us that has a pet, a lot of the times in an abusive relationship, an abuser will use the pet to manipulate the survivor. And so when a survivor wants to leave that abusive relationship and take the pet with them, when they contact First Step, one of the things that we ask them is, do you have a pet? And if they say yes, then we ask, what type of pet? And then Anna Sarah will help house cats and dogs. And they do have the ability to house horses. We have had somebody in the past call that they have a horse and they didn't want to leave the horse behind. They ended up not coming to First Step and receiving shelter, but that's another option. And so we do partner with Anna Sarah. Anna Sarah takes care of all costs when it comes to like pet care and those types of things, so that survivors don't have to worry about having anything that's cost prohibitive. So we do partner with Anna Sarah, and we're so thankful for their partnership.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions for Manuela?
Manuela,
Yes.
I didn't raise my hand because I just turned my phone back on, but I mean my video back on. But tell me about your experience since COVID and I know we talk about this, but what's your experience been since people have been more isolated and at home?
Yeah, that is a great question. So, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had an influx of calls from community members wondering if we were going to stay open, if we were going to continue providing the services that we were, and any changes that First Step would have. And so we assured everybody on our social media channels, as well as anybody that called, that we were going to continue providing the services that we have been. They would just look a little different. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, domestic violence rates increased nationwide and then at different parts of the state, but not necessarily in Harrisonburg, Rockingham, numbers that were reported. Obviously, we are unaware of domestic violence that happens if it's not reported. And so we did not have an increase in reported cases. I know in Virginia, Northern Virginia, and then the Eastern Shore had an increase in reported cases. We did not see an increase until like the last 4 months. We've remained steady when it comes to sheltering folks. We've also remained steady in answering phone calls and things. And our numbers were actually higher in September and August of this year than they were of last year. Around the same time. And so I think now, as folks are seeing that the pandemic is going to continue, the kids are back in school learning virtually, if that's the option that they signed up for. And especially if people were either laid off or are working from home and they're spending more time with their abuser, that will definitely, escalate the instances of abuse, because now the abuser has more access to the person that they're abusing. And so we remain steady with the calls and things that we're receiving. So yeah, that's what we've been seeing and kind of what we've been dealing with in the past several months.
Excellent. Thank you, Susie. John, you had your hand up. Did you have a question? Remember to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Well, I
There you
was just going to comment that my mom has worked for the Department of Welfare for about 14 or 15 years when we lived in Greenbank, and she encountered some rather grisly situations. I've got stories I could tell. I won't go into a lot of detail, but she dealt with that kind of stuff.
Thank you, John.
Yeah. Yes, it's really, I think folks involved in any type of like human service agency will see instances of abuse. And so I know whenever we've worked with Healthy Families of the Blue Ridge, the Department of Social Services, the Department of Housing, any type of agency that provides services to folks in Harrisonburg and Rockingham will see like overlap in abuse. And that's when they will call us and say, hey, we have a client who is suffering from this type of abuse. Would you all be able to help them? And so whenever a client has to call us in order for us to be able to provide services. Even, if somebody gives us their number or somebody gives us their contact information, we are unable to contact them because we don't know if it's safe to call them on the phone number that was given to us. And then just due to our confidentiality policies and also our volunteer services, those survivors choose what type of services they want and what type of contact. And so if somebody hasn't given us permission to call them, even when we know that they're in an abusive situation, we respect their choice because sometimes people aren't ready to leave an abusive relationship for different types of reasons. We've had folks in the past who have determined that it's safer to stay in that abusive relationship than leave because they might have kids and the abuser is threatening to hurt the kids, hurt themselves, hurt the abuser, the person that's being abused. We've had folks who are undocumented and their abuser threatens to call ICE, call the police department, threatens deportation, threatens to take away any type of like residency status, a green card or something that they might have. And so survivors fear that that will happen or fear the retaliation. So sometimes they think it's easier and safer to stay in that abusive relationship. And so we respect the survivor's choices. But yes, John, like people have called us from different agencies and have seen the different types of abuse. And we just let people know that we are here to support them whenever they are ready to come to First Step.
I remember my mother talking about going to court about a guy that she knew this guy was abusing his kids. And she said she was so mad. The guy was on the stand lying through his teeth, and the judge was just eating it up.
Yeah.
So she wouldn't go unless she had real good, firm evidence, good corroborative evidence that there was abuse.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's something that we see too, where abusers are extremely charismatic and manipulate any situation that they're in, because abuse is all about power and control. And so when somebody thinks they have power over somebody, they're able to control the situation to basically make it whatever they want it to be. And so when we look at the cycle of abuse, and when I've talked about emotional abuse and those types of things to lower someone's self-esteem, that when self-esteem is successfully lowered in somebody, the abuser knows that they have control over them. So it's easier to manipulate them, and it's easier to continue abusing them because they know that the survivor is not going to say anything, or not going to do something, or have been caught in that cycle of abuse. And so by the time it gets to physical abuse, somebody is less likely to say something because they have just been stuck in the cycle of abuse. And so when abusers do go to court, when police officers show up at an abuser's home after a domestic violence call, abusers are extremely likely to manipulate that situation as well and be seen as, you know, somebody that, oh, you know what, no, that didn't actually happen like that. Like they're over exaggerating and will do something that we call gaslighting. And gaslighting is basically manipulating the situation to make it seem as though the survivor has imagined things, makes them feel as though they don't really know what's happening or what's going on, even though they know the truth. And so we've also encountered instances where abusers will either call First Step to try to manipulate whatever situation is going on. And we've had instances in the past where people will show up, abusers will show up to First Step masking as donors. I had an instance one time where somebody showed up and said, oh, I love the work that you do. I'm going to write you a check. And we knew who this person was. And so we told them to leave the property, or we would, you know, call local authorities to have them removed. And so it's, they're very cunning and will manipulate any situation that they're in. So John, what your mom witnessed in court is something that we see very regularly when it comes to dealing with abusers.
And
Excellent.
frequently the reason they stay in an abusive situation is because the anxiety for leaving that situation is greater than the abuse itself.
Yes, yes. There's a lot of anxiety when it comes to leaving an abusive situation. And when at the moment of leaving, that's the most dangerous moment in that abusive relationship, in that cycle of abuse, and where survivors will fear for their lives the most. And so that is a crucial moment to act. If you are a supportive person, or, you know, if they call First Step or some type of service, like that is the moment to make sure that they're safe, that they have a safety plan in case something goes wrong. And then also to remember that people will leave their abusive relationship, come back to the abusive relationship, and leave 7 to 11 times before they actually leave for good. And so keeping that in mind will also help us understand a little bit more of the cycle of abuse, and will hopefully make us think a little bit more before we say, well, why don't you just leave? Or why do you keep going back, and kind of being judgmental about why someone stays in an abusive relationship, as opposed to understanding the reasons why somebody might stay. And it's psychological, it's a lot of factors.
Thank you. Thank you, John. I believe that the Reinhardts have a question. If you would go ahead and unmute yourself.
In Southwest Virginia, there was a relationship between jobs or career and abuse. particularly with the coal mines, there seemed to be a higher incidence. In the Valley, are there careers that are related, or do you see any relationship there, or is it sort of more diverse backgrounds of people that are more inclined, or if that's not a factor, I don't know.
Sure. So I think because here in Harrisonburg, our careers look different than, in Southwest Virginia. I think it'll truly depend just on like the type of person. And so we have had people who, abusers who are in academia, professors, things like that. We've had abusers who are politicians. And so sometimes those abusers, we've had calls from people who are out of state and whose abusers are politicians in another state, but they are afraid to access domestic violence services in their state because their abuser is the local mayor, their abuser is, a senator and things like that. And so they fear that they won't receive the quality necessary because their abuser is well known and they've never, been exposed as somebody who has been an abuser. We've had abusers who are in law enforcement. And so something that is not well known amongst a lot of people is that 40% of law enforcement folks are domestic abusers. And so when you're in a career of like power and control, that sometimes exasperates the abusive situations. And then we've also had abusers who are in positions of power where they do have a lot of wealth and things like that. And so they use money to control survivors. And so there hasn't been a career in Harrisonburg, Rockingham specifically that a lot of people have belonged to, but those have been some of the careers that we have seen where survivors will say, well, I didn't want to receive help because my abuser is a police officer, or I didn't want to receive help because they're a professor at this university. And so those are some of the careers that we've seen.
Susie has a question. Susie Fend, excuse me. Go ahead.
It's not really a question so much as a story to tell. When I was in my counseling program, in the master's degree program, there was a gentleman in our class we were in a family counseling class. And he was, ready to graduate with a master's degree in counseling. And he had schmoozed through all of that program. And one night we were called and told not to come to class. And his wife had left him. It was an abusive relationship. And he had gone to the local shelter and actually killed the sheriff or whoever came to the door and killed his wife and her daughter. It was the closest I've ever been to somebody that was two sides that
Right.
to talk about what you were saying, the cunning and the charm, and then to experience that this person that I had been in class with was this other person. It was pretty shocking.
Yes, we will encounter, abusers from all walks of life. I think people sometimes will assume that an abuser is somebody who looks a certain way, who has a certain amount of money, who lives in a certain, area of town or a certain place. But abusers, just like survivors, will come in all shapes and forms and from different backgrounds. And so it's always difficult, I think, to come to terms with somebody that we know is an abuser, especially if it's somebody that we're close to, because they haven't presented that side to us. But that doesn't mean that they haven't shown that abusive side to somebody else. And so when it comes to, having conversations with survivors and things like that, it's always really important to listen and not say things like, oh, I've never seen them do that, or, oh my goodness, I can't believe that they would do something like that, because that makes the survivor question the validity of, what's happened, and makes them question the instances of abuse. And so abusers are dangerous people. They have been known, as you mentioned, Susan, to commit murder. Also will go into like murder-suicide situations where they kill the person they're abusing and then kill themselves. They've been known to hurt or kill their children as well. And it's things that, you know, we sometimes don't see very often in our communities, but things that do happen. And by the time they do happen in our communities, it's, you know, obviously too late to get that survivor specific help if the abuser has killed them.
Yeah, that's what happened here too. He ended up killing himself as well.
Thank you, Susie. Any other questions for Manuela? Yes, John.
I might make mention that I'm, of course, as many know, I'm a scout leader, and we have to go through YPT, youth protection training. It used to be like only every three years, but now they're asking us to go through every year, and there are an enormous amount of guidelines and such about how we relate to the scouts and various things like that. We're gonna have to go through about at least a 45-minute to an hour course, usually online or the like, and we have to get a certificate saying that we've gone through this. So that's an important part of my scouting experience.
Mm-hmm. It's I like that you mentioned training and things like that, because when working with domestic violence survivors, we have a lot of training that happens. We talk about the different types of abuse. We are trained on how to handle abusive situations, especially crisis situations, since any domestic violence is a crisis. And so we want to make sure that we're equipped, whether it's somebody calling for a resource, it's somebody saying that the instance of abuse just happened, or somebody saying that, you know, I was in an abusive relationship for 3 years, I now left, what are things that I need to do? And then we also provide training for our volunteers. So people that want to volunteer with First Step will go through 40 hours of training to give them knowledge and information on the different types of abuse, what it looks like in different types of relationships. And then we also go through, you know, child abuse and neglect. We go through elder abuse, since that's something that's also not very talked about. Back in July, August, we had an increase in calls about elder abuse. And when it comes to elder abuse, it's usually caretakers who are the abusers. And that could be a caretaker of the family. So a daughter, a son, a child of the person that needs care, or sometimes in a care facility. That tends to happen as well. And so we did have a little bit of a spike in elder abuse calls. And so all of our staff is trained to handle those things as well as different types of intimate partner violence. And then we also want to make sure that all staff and all volunteers know how to handle different types of relationships, whether that's interracial relationships with immigrants, undocumented persons or not, relationships between teenagers, and then obviously LGBTQ relationships. We want to make sure that we're providing good quality of care for everybody that comes to First Step. We want to make sure that everybody feels safe. And so training is extremely important to staff and then to our volunteers. And there's also different ways for people to get involved with First Step if it's not, you know, if they don't aren't interested in a big volunteer position. They can host like donation drives if they have a club or an organization that would like to partner with First Step to do some type of fundraiser. Those are also ways to get involved and to help the greater community, because survivors always look to who is involved in something that affects them. And so we might not know that somebody in our lives is suffering through some type of domestic abuse, but if they see us being involved with First Step or being involved with different causes, they will identify us as a safe person that they can talk to when it comes to things that are going on in their life. And so being involved is extremely important for the survivor community as a whole, because it shows them solidarity. It shows that people in the community care about them, and it's not just, you know, they don't feel as alone, especially if somebody doesn't have family in the area and, you know, we're the only support system that they have.
Excellent. Thank you, Manuela. Any other questions, folks? I'm not seeing. Yes, Virginia, go ahead.
Hi, in the past, I think you've accepted like non-food donations like shampoo or feminine products and those kind of things.
Mhm.
That's still something that you accept.
Yes. So I'm glad, Virginia, that you brought up donations. So we do accept non-perishable food items. Specifically, I think our greatest need for non-perishables is canned fruit, canned proteins, and things like that. And then ready to make like noodles, whether it's ramen, any type of instant noodle. And then, you know, like Easy Mac, those types of things that can be microwavable. And in terms of hygiene products, we accept full-sized bottles of shampoo, conditioner, body wash, soaps, things like that, toothbrushes, full-sized tubes of toothpaste, and then gift cards to Sally Beauty Supply and Target for folks that have different hair textures that might not be, you know, accommodating with the shampoos and stuff that we normally get. And so that's extremely important for our survivors, especially our Black and Indigenous survivors that need different types of care products. And so we want to make sure to also highlight that. And then in terms of clothing donations, we do get a lot of requests for clothing donations. And the thing that we need the most, that our survivors need, are comfortable clothes, you know, like yoga pants, sweatshirts, those types of things, new underwear in all sizes, pajamas in all sizes, specifically like long sleeve and long pant pajamas as the weather is getting cooler, slippers and bedroom shoes in all sizes, and you know, bathrobes, those types of things. Because at the moment, we are sheltering survivors at the shelter, but because we want to make sure everybody's safe and maintaining social distancing and making sure that people don't come up in contact with as many folks, we are sheltering survivors at an off-site location that is confidential and safe for them. And so they will also need like those types of things, and we want to make sure that they're safe, especially since they're not staying physically at the shelter, but still, you know, receiving services from us. And so aside from those types of in-kind donations, we also accept monetary donations that can be made through our website to help us cover the costs of those off-site locations for survivors. So that's a great question, Virginia. Thank you for bringing that up.
Excellent. Any other questions? Just raise your hand if you would, or come off mute. Okay, I'm not seeing anything else. Manuela, is there anything you'd like to share with us in closing?
Yes, so we are celebrating Domestic Violence Awareness Month because that's the month of October. And so First Step is taking it a little step further and celebrating Domestic Violence Action Month. And so during this month, we are inviting and encouraging folks to be a little bit more involved with First Step. And different ways that they can do that is by signing up for our monthly newsletter. And so Mary, if folks can email you or let you know if they would like to be signed up for our newsletter, would you be able to send those emails over to me?
I'd be happy to do that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, my email address is my full name, which you see on the screen, at gmail.com. So just feel free to reach out and I can send those along to Manuela.
Thank you. So on our newsletter, we have different types of resources for people that are in abusive relationships, or how to be involved with First Step. And then that also includes different like wish lists, especially since the holidays are coming up. And so if people are also interested in sponsoring families for the holidays, they can reach out to First Step. You can just call our number that is on our website, on our brochures and things, to be more if you would like to sponsor a family with holiday gifts. And then being connected with First Step through our newsletter, or if you have additional questions, you can always call the office. Mary also has my contact info, so please feel free to reach out to me if you have additional questions, would like to speak to somebody at First Step, or would like us to do a presentation or a Q&A with any organization that you're involved with.
Excellent. Well, Manuela, thank you very much for your time this morning. We greatly appreciate it. And we're so appreciative of the work you do in the community, because it is so very important. So thank you very much. Folks, if there's nothing else, next week our speaker is going to be Reverend Clayton, who's also going to be our preacher, as Stephanie will be taking some breathing time for her. So I need to let you all know that Clayton has to be done and out the door here by noon. So we are going to wrap it up a little earlier than we normally would. Just be aware of that as you're thinking about questions, but he's going to be speaking about Massanetta Springs.